I want to welcome folks.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, what a perfect segue. I am supposed to say that this meeting is being recorded, and by staying on the meeting, you give us permission to share this with other people, because there are others who want to be here. And if at any point you're uncomfortable, you certainly can manipulate your own image and stop the video. Otherwise, you'll be part of the recording with your punam as well as your name. So we're very glad for that. We remind ourselves every time we have a webinar that the CAP Center is trans-denominational, which means that wherever you come in relationship, however you relate to the story of the Jewish people, that connection is your passport to being with us. We welcome you and we encourage this diversity of faces and orientations, and we're very appreciative of that. The mission of the Kaplan Center, as many of you know, I think most of you know, is to retrieve, recover, to keep, to catalog, and to disseminate the teachings of Mordechai Kaplan. That's half the story, very important. The other half is to do so in such a way that B'nai Kaplan, those of us who see ourselves working in the tradition of Mordechai Kaplan, have a chance to take his insights, to revisit them, to revalue them, and to apply them to the 21st century Jewish life issues in 21st century Jewish life. A little later in the summer, you'll see a very helpful article that Eric will be publishing on our website about that process, and it's so much a part of what will be our webinars, our website, and everything that will go on at the Kaplan Center next year has that dimension of creative re-engagement, re-evaluation, and building on Kaplan into the future. So we very much look forward to that process with you. I, in a moment, will introduce a good friend and the president of the Kaplan Center for Mordechai Kaplan Center for Jewish Peoplehood. That person's name is Jane Susswine. Just want to say a word and give some context. Yesterday, our Torah portion was Shalach Lecha, and I had a really wonderful moment, actually. For the first time in 2.5 years, I could chant Torah from a real Torah scroll. Not a tikkun and not a screen. And what were the first 2 words that I chanted? Vayahas Kalev. Well, and Caleb hushed the Israelite community so they could move forward. I understand that more deeply now because I now have a 4-month-old grandson named Caleb. And I am very glad that we don't constitute for Jane and for her leadership a group of rebels that need to be hushed, but we do need leadership. And I want to say that Jane offers us such a wonderful combination of a thoughtful mind, a caring heart, and a leiv nadiv, a disposition that says, let me take on many, many things. And we need that in terms of the work of the Kaplan Center. So we're very fortunate. I personally consider myself fortunate. I'm glad to turn you over now to Jane Susswine for a few more comments about the Kaplan Center and some of the leadership, and then moving on to the main focus of it's been almost a year since the death of our family member, friend, colleague, Dan Cedarbaum, and we're going to be focusing on that with teaching. Jane?
Thank you for those kind words, Jeff. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this very special webinar where we'll be giving kavod to our founder, Dan Cedarbaum, and announcing the winners of the Dan Cedarbaum Prize for Education. We are so grateful to the Cedarbaum Jacobs family and all the Kaplan Center supporters who've enabled us to continue presenting programs of high quality and interest to many all year. We've already planned a year of fascinating webinars for next year, 5783/2022-3. We're pleased to announce that we already have 3 generous sponsors for our October webinar, which should be Right on Point, Judaism and Democracy, featuring Rabbis Elliot Dorff and Sid Schwartz. Our thanks to Deborah and Josh Levin, the Sam Kelman Family Foundation, and the Jacob Cedarbaums. The sponsorship is also in appreciation of the scholarship and the exemplary way that Dr. Eric Kaplan joined with Dr. Rabbi Jeff Shine to shepherd the Kaplan Center through this year. Our small board has expanded and roles have shifted. Jeff Shine, formerly co-director and senior education consultant, is now our executive director. Eric Kaplan, who with Jeff shepherded us through last year as co-director, will serve with Mel Scull as our academic advisors. And Jack Wolofsky, we love, is our invaluable Kaplan resource and supporter. We're delighted to have 3 new board members, Rabbis Jeffrey Eisenstadt and Michael Cohn, who is not with us, he's in Israel, and also Caitlin Hayes, our youngest member, who is full of enthusiasm for our mission. Caitlin and Jeff will say a word about why they've joined the Kaplan Center board. Caitlin?
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm currently based in New Brunswick, Canada. I joined the Kaplan Center when I first got involved in the Society for Advancement of Judaism. And I was struck by Kaplan's work and the values of reconstructing Judaism and how it neatly fitted in with a lot of the core tenets of digital Judaism and being able to reinvent Judaism and propagate it to the young and also to people far and wide of different backgrounds, whether they're rural, whether they are Jews of color, whether they're LGBTQ or disabled. And I think that that mission of being able to bring reconstructing Judaism to people digitally and also to a younger generation is very important. And that's why I'm here with the Kaplan Center today. Thank you.
Jeffrey?
Hi, everybody. I was fortunate enough to study with Mordecai Kaplan back in 1970, a long time ago. All right, and Jeffrey Shine and I were students together at RRC, and I was a very close friend of Dan Cedarbaum, who really helped us get started when the Jewish Reconstructionist Federation was getting ready to find a camp. And Dan was someone who was instrumental in making that all happen. Dan and I traveled around looking at many camps together before we found the one in the Poconos. So I'm eager to be here to work with the Kaplan Center and to continue the work of some great leaders that we've had.
Eric, I believe we're back to you at this point.
Oh, okay. Okay, yes, sorry about that. So as Jeffrey Shine said in the introduction, we're the focus of today's session is on Dan's legacy in so many ways. And this particular portion that we're about to enter is reflecting on Dan as a Jewish leader. The reason why I think we settled on this topic was really largely because as we've had the experience of taking control of the Kaplan Center, it's only been so natural to reflect on Dan's work, how he approached it. And also because, through this year, we have spoken to so many people who have had so much to say and have been so touched by Dan's leadership in the Jewish world and elsewhere. So we called upon 4 people who we felt collectively could provide a very, very rich picture of how Dan approached Jewish leadership. The people really say in their presentations who they are, so I'm not going to take time for that. And we also won't have breaks between the four presenters. We'll kind of go one to the other. But I encourage you to use the chat function to jot down some of your own thoughts as Dan, as a Jewish leader, as you experience Dan. And we'll, of course, share those not only when we post this recording to our website, but we'll share it with Dan's family. So the presenters today are in the following order. There's Rabbi Arnie Rackles, Rabbi Helen Plotkin, Dr. Sam Fleischacker, and of course, Karen Jacobs, Dan's wife. So Arnie is the only person who's appearing today by video. So I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to set up the video and share that with you. So just give me a second to pull this off.
I'm so glad to be with you today, but also I feel sad knowing that this is a yahrzeit observance for Dan Cedarbaum. I'm traveling while this meeting is going on, and Jeff Shine kindly said that I could record this in advance because I really did want to be with everyone to remember Dan today. I was the rabbi of JRC, of the Jewish Reconstructionist Congregation, from 1976 to 1991. That's when I met Dan Cedarbaum, and I was immediately impressed with him. Dan was what we say in our tradition, lifnim mishurat hadin. He was beyond expectation for a layperson, and I, of course, love laypersons, as every rabbi does, and we appreciate them, especially when they have an interest and a hunger to learn about Yiddishkeit, about Jewishness. Dan, well, he had it in spades. He was curious, he was intelligent, he was an intellectual. He had drive and passion, all of which was incredibly impressive. His dedication to learning and then teaching was impressive. His dedication to justice and politics, to the law, to Reconstructionism, and most of all to Mordechai Kaplan's vision of Reconstructionism. It was all exemplary and exciting to see in Dan. He always, of course, was thoughtful. He never wanted to do anything in a partial way. If he was interested and passionate about something, well, he did it all the way. I mean, a good leader, and I know we're talking about leadership today, a good leader is somebody who has ideas and vision and passion and goals, and of course, sometimes impatience as well. And Dan was impatient in the best sense. He was impatient to see our movement thrive, and he was impatient to see our movement reflect Kaplan's energy and vision. On a more personal level, it was one of my fondest memories as I look back at JRC and my years there, performing Karen and Dan's wedding. They're a wonderful couple. They both shared that intellectual drive. They were highly educated and intelligent and articulate. They shared this intellectual journey of Reconstructionism together. This is the kind of person, this is the kind of couple that every rabbi dreams of having in a synagogue. I saw Dan's love of learning most in Lunch and Learn monthly classes that I ran down in the Loop. Some of those classes were at his law firm. We would study text, and he had a voracious interest in text, in the fundamentals of Judaism, Torah, Talmud, codes. And then in addition, when we spoke of Reconstructionism, when I taught about Reconstructionism, I'm a classical Reconstructionist, and so was Dan. Seeing in Kaplan's vision and dreams and ethical integrity and love of Judaism and love of Klal Yisrael, bringing the Jewish community together, seeing in all that, the foundation for what the future of a Judaism that appealed to so many who feel intellectually and emotionally disenfranchised from Judaism could be. Kaplan was truly alive through Dan and his leadership. One Evanston is an example of that, taking Kaplan's ideas and sharing them with a much broader world. Dan and I had a relationship that extended far beyond my years at JRC. He wrote to me, he called me, sent me emails, and we saw each other at meetings. It was my pleasure to spend time with him when I returned to JRC about 8 years ago for the 50th anniversary of the synagogue, when the synagogue kindly invited me to return and celebrate that 50th anniversary. Dan would suggest over the years speakers for me at University Synagogue. He would comment on letters that I wrote to the congregation weekly, so I presume that he read those letters from time to time. Or he would comment on sermon topics that I gave, or creative ideas I offered to the congregation. And of course, it was my pleasure to invite Dan to speak at University Synagogue about Reconstructionism. Dan was a gift. Dan was a gift to JRC. Dan was a gift to the Chicago Jewish community. Dan was a gift to the Reconstructionist movement. Dan was someone who proved that an educated layperson could be an inspiration, sometimes far beyond that of many rabbis. He was one of the most learned, curious, intelligent lay people that I'd ever met. I treasured our friendship. I admired his work, and creating the Kaplan Center, well, that will live on, and Dan will live on through the Kaplan Center and the religious humanism that it espouses, and the centrality of Jewish peoplehood that it advances. Dan will always be a central figure in our movement. He truly was a shomer, a guardian of Kaplan's humanistic vision, and even more, Dan was a creator who advanced Reconstructionism and Kaplanianism far beyond our founders' dreams. Im tirtzu ein zo agada, said Theodore Herzl. If you will it, it is no dream. Well, Dan proved that if you envision it, and if you will it into being, then the Kaplan Center and all that it stands for and all that it has done and all that it will do, it is much more than a dream. It's become a reality in our movement and a significant pillar of the advancement of Reconstructionism. Like so many of you, I miss Dan. I mourn the years he could have had, but I celebrate the years he did have and the wonderful work that he did to advance Judaism and Reconstructionism during those years. To have a leader of our movement like Dan Cedarbaum was a gift to us all. Zichrono livracha. May Dan Cedarbaum's memory be a blessing to us all. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today.
We'll now hear from Rabbi Helen Plotkin.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So in the book of Joshua, chapter 1, God is telling Joshua what it's going to take to be a great leader. And among his instructions, he says, Lo yamush sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha v'hagita bo yomam v'layla. This book of Torah shall not depart from your mouth, and you shall give voice to it day and night. I knew Dan for more than 20 years, but it was only 2 years ago that he did something magical that changed my life. It was summer of 2020, and I was about to begin the final year of a 20-year career teaching biblical Hebrew at Swarthmore College. I had been pondering what I wanted to do next, and I threw it out into the universe that I wanted to teach a serious biblical Hebrew class to adult learners online. I'm not sure why Dan contacted me right then, looking for someone to teach Hebrew to adult learners online. He really had no way of knowing that I was at a turning point. Fast forward, we built a new course called Biblical Hebrew for Everyone, and there are already about 50 adults newly assembling the tools for deep Jewish learning. The process of creating this course tells a lot about Dan Cedarbaum, both his values and his powers. First, he told me that what had made the great difference in his own Jewish life was access to traditional learning. He had deep gratitude for his teachers and study partners, and he wanted the Jews in his orbit to have the opportunities that he had. And at a more philosophical level, he felt a great truth of Kaplanian thinking, that was the riches of Jewish tradition must not be the sole property of Orthodox men. In Dan's eyes, it was imperative that the contemporary progressive Jewish community be engaged directly with the texts on their own terms, in their own language, without gatekeepers holding the keys. And when Dan thought something was important, he did not say, as so many of us do, they should, right? He said, I'm going to, and then he did. So in the course of a few conversations, Dan and I mapped out the idea for a year-long course to bring people from reading Hebrew mechanically to having substantial Torah study skills. But how does one find the students for such a course? And this is where Dan's uniqueness really shines. We knew that this course would only work if the students had the commitment and ability to follow through. And because it was online, they could be from anywhere. Dan proposed to reach out to his network of rabbis and synagogue leaders and have them each tap a few members of their congregation whom they thought were ready to take this on. So it was building networking and community while using it. When the issue of money came up, Dan had an if you build it, they will come sort of attitude, or actually, I guess maybe it's they will come and they will build it. Dan simply refused to believe that money was ever a real obstacle. We came up with a reasonable tuition and a minimal level of pay for me, and Dan committed to filling in the gap if we did not get 12 enrollees. And honestly, we couldn't have gotten started without that commitment. But here's the thing, our first cohort started with 28 people. We had to open 2 sections to fit everyone on the screen, and the program paid for itself without the need of Dan's backing. And 20 people graduated, and almost all of them are now signed up for a weekly reading group that will hopefully continue for the rest of our lives. The second cohort is now in week 8 and has 23 members. Dan died about halfway through the year of the first cohort. We had spoken every couple of weeks, spending lots of time grinning over how well this was going. And then he stopped calling. And then he was brief and sad when I called. And then he didn't answer at all. And it was impossible for me to believe that our brief, close partnership could possibly end so suddenly and so soon. For the time being, Biblical Hebrew for Everyone is administered through my project, Makom Torah, which is affiliated with RJ, instead of through the Kaplan Center. In order to teach this course online, I developed a set of electronic resources that I've used several times now, including in a couple of classes at RRC. And each time around, they are refined a little more, and I hope to publish them as a textbook at some point, possibly a digital textbook, that's my preference, and dedicate that to Dan. It certainly would be much easier if he were around to encourage and help me. This project was driven by Dan's commitment to learning as a powerful tool in the hands of contemporary Judaism. His ability to move ahead undaunted, his love of networking, and the mutual respect that embodied all his relationships. What made the experience so wonderful and so bittersweet for me was Dan's incredible talent for collaboration, how much fun it was to design this with him, how he trusted me with it from his gut and was never the slightest bit tempted to micromanage. He could hop over the gap between vision and actualization like it was nothing. It is so much lonelier to soldier on without him in this endeavor. I'm committed to upholding Dan's commitment to not let Torah depart from our mouths. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Sam?
So my name is Sam Fleischak. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a member of what was a quite thriving Orthodox minyan in Evanston, where Dan lived, that he sometimes attended, which was run basically by Rabbi Michael Belinsky, who is a very good friend and teacher, as well as colleague of Dan's. And I'm here really as Michael's representative. I'm going to read you shortly a tribute that Michael wanted to make to Dan on this occasion. He is currently doing his niece's wedding and flying on to Israel tonight, so he couldn't be here. I did want to say on my own behalf, I knew Dan in at least, I think it's 4 different contexts. We were both involved from the early days in J Street, and he introduced me to Jeremy Ben-Ami, which was interesting and useful. More directly, he tried to bring his egalitarian minyan together with our Orthodox minyan in various ways, and he and I'm sort of the gabbai of that minyan, and I was always struck by how extremely generous Dan, as an egalitarian Reconstructionist Jew, was to our, let's just say, not so egalitarian Orthodox community, and how much he wanted to work across the practical and theological divides, let's say. And it went with that also that he built one Jewish Evanston out of a disparate group of 4 or 5, at least, different congregations, including our Orthodox one and a Reform synagogue and a egalitarian minyan. And it was a wonderful vision of what Jewish peoplehood can look like. Real diversity coming together where we could in learning, and then we prayed separately, we ate together again. And it took place on many of the Jewish holidays over the year, from Shavuot to Tisha B'Av, and it really gave me as a Jew in Evanston a sense that all the different communities belong together in one Jewish people, I think more strongly than anything else that went on in this town. And then finally, during COVID, Dan opened his house to a minyan which was essentially non-denominational, egalitarian traditional, shall we say, in terms of its practice, but as much as possible, reaching broadly across gaps so that I felt comfortable davening there, but also people who were Reform or Reconstructionists. And once again, he showed his pluralism in basically allowing every prayer leader to lead the services as they saw fit. And I guess this fits in with what Helen said and others have said too. I don't know anyone who was such a model of Jewish pluralism and consequently Jewish peoplehood, and also of doing rather than just saying. Many people might have talked about bringing the Jews of Evanston and different communities together. He did it. Many people might have talked about whether you can bring together minyanim of people with very different views of halacha. He tried his hardest to do that. Didn't always work, but he tried his hardest to do that. So like everyone else on this call, I really, really appreciated what he did for us, and I miss him greatly. So that was maybe a bit longer than I meant. Let me now move to Rabbi Belinsky's tribute to Dan. And the rest following is simply read from a transcript that Rabbi Belinsky gave me. I am sorry I am unable to join you this afternoon as I am at my niece's wedding, and I want to thank my friend Sam Fleischacker for including my remarks in his presentation on our friend Dan Cedarbaum of blessed memory. My relationship with Dan began over a Talmud text. We were introduced by his then law partner, Art Winter in Evanston, while I was the Hillel director at Northwestern University. And this quickly led to a Talmud study group that met twice monthly for about 25 years. During this time, Dan was a very active member at the Jewish Reconstructionist congregation in Evanston and was asked to chair the Synagogue Federation Commission at the Chicago Jewish Federation while I was president of the Chicago Board of Rabbis. We worked on a project that year of 3 Batei Midrash study programs in the different regions of Chicago, bringing together multiple shuls and rabbis of different denominations for a full afternoon Talmud study session. Over time, this continued in Evanston as One Jewish Evanston and met a few times a year. Dan was also active in a number of other organizations, served a term representing the Reconstructionist movement on the Council of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, was involved with J Street, and later founded the Mordechai Kaplan Center, which brings us here today. But I was asked to address Dan's contributions as a lay leader. What qualities did Dan embody that made him so successful, that allowed his aspirations to come to fruition? Here I would like to turn to the well-known statement from Pirkei Avot 1:6, Yehoshua ben Parachia v'nitai ha'arbeli kiblu mehem, Yehoshua ben Parachia omer, aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver, v'hevei dan et kol ha'adam lekaf zchut. Joshua ben Parachia and Nitai the Arbelite received the oral tradition from them. Joshua ben Parachia used to say, appoint or make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend and judge all people favorably. Dan was really good at finding teachers, seeking out people from whom he could learn and from a wide range of views. Dan understood that as a lay leader, he needed to be an educated Jew, and that included skill in Hebrew. For years, he studied Hebrew with Professor Grossman in Chicago, and it was always important in our Talmud study group that the text first be read in the original. He sought out teachers, regularly attended Hadar seminars, but also paid close attention to those who taught locally. He would alternate on Shabbat mornings between different minyans and congregations. Dan made for himself many teachers and shared them and their knowledge with many audiences. But Dan went beyond making for himself teachers. He also acquired them as friends. People have been puzzled by the use of this word acquired, in Hebrew kineh, which is associated with kinyan, making something yours through a purchase or thorough or another manner. We like to think we make friends and not acquire them as we might for other personal items. We also see this use of the word acquire in the Avot de Rabbi Natan, a commentary and amplification of Avot, and acquire for yourself a friend. How so? This is a quote from Avot de Rabbi Natan. This teaches that a man should acquire a friend for himself who will eat with him and drink with him and study scripture and Mishnah with him and go to sleep with him and tell him all his secrets, both secrets of the Torah and secrets of the ways of the world. For when they sit and engage in Torah together and one of them makes a mistake in the law or the division of chapters or declares an impure thing pure or a pure thing impure or forbidden thing permitted or permitted thing forbidden, then his friend will correct him. And how do we know that when his friend corrects him and studies with him that they will have great reward from their studies? For it says, it's a quote from Kohelet 4:9, two are better than one, for they have great reward from their efforts. Now, what is described here, back to Michael's text, is surely not someone you buy or acquire as one might a refrigerator. There's a deep, intimate relationship here. And we can further amplify this with one more parallel text from the additions to the Tana de Be'eliyahu in Perek Derech Eretz. It adds a proof text from Numbers 27:18. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Kach lecha et Yehoshua bin Nun, ish asher ruach bo, v'samachta et yadcha alav. And the Lord answered Moses, take to you Joshua son of Nun, an inspired man, and lay your hand upon him. Take a man who is brave and humble like you. The term kach, take, teaches that a friend is acquired, bought by payment of money. Now, nowhere is there any direct reference in the Torah to Moses buying Joshua for money. Rather, as the late scholar Leon Nimoy, no relation to Spock, that's pointed out by Michael, pointed out, the kach and lakach, to take, later acquired the technical legal meaning to purchase. Hence, a close friendship must be paid for by equal friendship expressed in terms of loyalty, generosity, sharing of knowledge, and worldly goods, etc. I will add that in this context, Joshua is seen as not only the successor and disciple of Moses, but perhaps also as a friend to Moses. I think Nimoy's reading of this text accurately describes how Dan's teachers became his friends, an equal friendship expressed in terms of loyalty, generosity, sharing of knowledge, and worldly goods. Dan, as we know, was super bright, comfortable speaking up, and challenging. I loved our conversations, his insights, and his critiques. He was very loyal and generous in the support of our institutions. Indeed, he covered the food expenses for almost all of our one Jewish Evanston gatherings. The Avot passage concludes, and judge all people favorably. This is one more aspect of Dan that I want to praise. Dan was committed to giving voice and trying to include people across the Jewish spectrum. It was very important to him, particularly in our One Jewish Evanston programs, that everyone be fully represented at the meetings and given a voice in the planning. Each group would decide who would teach for them. Finally, as the lay leader, Dan brought great organizational skills. He not only founded the Kaplan Center, but he also produced the excellent annual conferences. I was able to attend only the last one on Jewish music. It was a wonderful gathering of scholars, rabbis, and musicians. Dan made the conference an integrated spiritual and intellectual experience. To summarize, as a leader, Dan made for himself and for many others teachers and acquired them as loyal friends. He modeled the curious, learning Jew, respecting the integrity of the tradition and opening it to ongoing renewal. He brought us together while respecting our diversity. And I will miss his excitement when he would share with me a new insight he had learned or a service or Torah session he had experienced. For Dan, Jewish leadership was both a journey of the intellect and a journey of the soul.
Thank you, Sam. Karen?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Dan, my companion and husband of 40 years, was a mention many different ways. For today's reflections and my 5-minute allotment, I will focus on Dan as a family man, a Jewish family man. Many people do not know that I was raised Presbyterian and converted to Judaism under the instruction of the much beloved and inspirational Rabbi Arnie Rocklis, from whom you heard earlier. Arnie and Reconstructionism, as it was then practiced, inspired Dan and me to get increasingly involved in Judaism, primarily because it was smart and progressive Judaism, and it did not conflict with our own beliefs. Having JRC nearby facilitated this evolution, At that time, JRC was a hotbed of the Reconstructionist movement. Not only was Arnie Rockless at JRC's helm, but JRC was full of serious Reconstructionist lay scholars who practiced a form of Judaism that was both progressive and traditional. To us, Reconstructionism was always the link between Judaism and modernity. It made it possible for Dan and me to practice Judaism as a civilization without pretending to a level of God belief that we did not have. Without Reconstructionism, I would not have converted to Judaism, and I doubt that Dan would have taken the path that led him to devote so much of his life to Jewish study. So Reconstructionism and JRC opened the world of Jewish ritual and Jewish literacy to us. On all these issues, Dan was way ahead of me. He was raised in a conservative synagogue, although the family did start attending Reconstructionist services under Rabbi Nadelman when Dan and his brother were in college, his brother Jonathan Cedarbaum, who's present today. He knew Hebrew and all the prayers. And as Dan got increasingly serious about Judaism, he was way ahead of me. You all know how hard he studied, how he took classes constantly, how he arranged innumerable different prayer, study, and community groups, and of course, how he founded the Kaplan Center. But Dan also brought the zeal into the home, but in a more measured way. Of course, the kids all learned Hebrew, went to Hebrew school, traveled to Israel, and became bar mitzvah. But Dan did not push us all to be at his level, to be little rabbis. Our practice of Judaism was robust, but adapted to our level. A level, I might add, that would allow any of us to amp up our observance, as Dan did, if we should ever choose to do so. This all started, of course, with bringing the babies to the high holidays. And probably the happiest times of Dan's life were holding the babies for hours at a time. During the holidays. Second to that were the regular formal Shabbat dinners and the blessings over the children, a ritual that Dan relished. For holidays, we prepared photocopied pamphlets with the requisite blessings, songs, etc. I still have all the tattered booklets stapled together for Shabbat, Sukkot, Hanukkah, etc. in boxes in the basement, although they became obsolete as we became literate and didn't need them any longer. Such easy-to-use materials with Reconstructionist language and without the endless long-form prayers are still sadly lacking in Judaism, and that's a topic for another day, as Jeff Shine and others know well. We even prepared and used for decades our own Haggadah, adding on pages every year or so as major events occurred, such as the 500th anniversary of the expulsion of Jews from Spain, and the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the camps, etc. It also focused on the women in the Seder story as well, which I was happy to see in Marcia Falk's new wonderful Haggadah, also a Kaplan Center project that came to fruition this year, and I invite everyone to purchase that Haggadah. It's really lovely. But this project was always a push-pull process because Dan always wanted to add more prayers, and I always wanted to focus more on the history and the story. In fact, that push-pull feature became a feature of our Jewish observance. Dan with 5 different books in his hands, me trying to move things along. Part of our household ritual included the weekend Torah study sessions, which lasted for almost 30 years. The COVID era backyard services, including high holiday services, that were probably the best high holiday services I've ever been to, and innumerable gatherings on the holidays. So although we were a lay household and not in any way strictly observant, the house was very Jewish. And we tried to focus on the fun parts of Judaism as well. For example, one of our first purchases was a sukkah when the kids were little. Decorating and eating in the sukkah was a highlight for the family. our Jewish friends, and our neighbors, Jews and non-Jews alike. Dan was perfectly fine with our using Christmas and holiday cards to make paper chains. A small sliver of Santa now and then didn't do any harm. Dan included the family of his brother Jonathan and his wife Alice and my non-Jewish family in our Jewish lives as well. There's no reasons why Christians cannot go to a Hanukkah party or a Seder. And of course, Dan was a source of, and that's my side of the family, not Jonathan and Alice, who are members of a Reconstructionist synagogue. And of course, Dan was a source of all Jewish questions and answers. What's my Hebrew name? How do I spell it? Do I light the candles before and after? You get the idea. Dan's leadership in the home showed that a family can have a rich and meaningful Jewish life that is consistent with the way we think about religion in modern times without full metal orthodoxy. He was not only doing that work out in the world with the Kaplan Center, One Jewish Evanston, and so many other activities. He was doing it at home and was an example for all of us.
Thank you, Karen. We're, as I'm sure like all of you, I'm so deeply grateful to Arnie, Helen, Sam, Michael, and Karen for the words that they've shared. As we said at the beginning, we're going to continue on with the program, and I'm going to allow my colleague Jeff Shine to talk about the prize that was created in Dan's memory to celebrate innovation in Jewish education. And when that part of the program is over, we will open it up so that everybody on the call can, unmute themselves and share their own memories of Dan as a person, as a Jewish leader, as you see fit. So Jeffrey.
Thank you. I too am appreciative of all of those. I want to remark in relationship to Karen's in particular, not only was it moving, but condensing 40 years of living into 5 minutes is hard, but that was reasonable payback, because I remember when I hugged you at Dan's funeral, your first words into my ear were 5 minutes. You only have 5 minutes. I don't know how I did, but you did terrific. You put so much into that. Very, very appreciative. So I will say a little
around
bit about
7 minutes.
Okay.
Around 7 minutes. But when I said 5, I knew you would go over.
Okay, well, I'm a rabbi. That happens. I'll go back and listen to the tape and see how many you were, but it was all meaningful, so thank you. I'd like to put the Dan Cedarbaum Prize into a larger context, and then we have the prize recipients who are with us, and I will introduce them. A year ago when Dan died, I think that we felt two imperatives, those who were closest to him, Karen, the family. One was to follow through on the commitments Dan had made, which was to things like A Night of Beginnings and the Hebrew Project, and that was important. But it was also important that the center as a whole survive, and that the complement to Dan was not only would old projects be finished, but new projects would be born. And we've worked very hard at that. I think we've had a good year. One of those projects was in the arena, the initial arena of Jewish education. That's how I got to know Dan. And we had the backing of Jeffrey Eisenstadt is on this call, of Jeffrey and his wife Sarah and their family foundation in establishing a prize in Jewish education in Dan's name. So we were very eager to do that, and we put it out there that we're looking for projects that were, these are the exact words, Kaplanian in spirit and innovative in educational character. And truth to tell, we thought that perhaps we would get 10 or 15 applications. We were just astounded that we received 39 applications, and B, the committee, which included representatives from the RRA, from RENA, from Camp Havaya, from RJ, all who did terrific work for us. And we were set up to do some of that through previous work that Rabbi Aaron Hirsch, who's also on this call, had done. We couldn't believe we got so many, and even more importantly, we couldn't believe the quality of so many of them. So I'm going to I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to take you through the website, a website that's being rebuilt with, I think, a great aesthetic sense, along with new content, a new bibliography of Kaplan's work. Mel has been working on lots of important content coming aboard. And I'll take you through the portal to the Innovation Garden, the 21st Century Kaplanian Innovation Garden, which contains not only the 2 trees, the pillars of the projects that received the prize, but a parallel garden of 14 projects, and I will bring them up. So here we are at the new website, and under education, we can go to the Innovation Garden, which I have, and I will introduce these 2 people in just a moment. But I'm eager for you to know that we were able to award 14 other awards to 14 projects listed in front of you, all of which we thought were groundbreaking in one way or another. Several people who are directing these projects are on the call with us. And we offered these people a premier place on November 9th when we opened the Innovation Garden to share their projects. So we're very excited about these and glad that they will be with us in an ongoing way. And these 2 people who created really hard work for our committee, because there were so many worthy projects, but in the end, the committee felt very good that the 2 projects we chose to be recipients of the Dan Cedarbaum Prize, which is a $5,000 prize, came from Rabbi Michelle Greenfield from Kol Tzedek Synagogue in Philadelphia. It's a Hebrew and Tefillah curriculum, a project engaging children in producing liturgy that reflects the pluralism and diversity of the Jewish community. And Rabbi Beck Richmond, whose the Yadenu monthly Makers Project establishes a new center of Jewish growth, incorporating meditation, music, and art in her soon-to-be new home of Cleveland, Ohio. So I ask these people who are on the call with us to help round out, bring full circle the Cedarbaum Prize process. We asked them to think about projects that were Kaplanian in spirit, innovative in educational character, and I invited them to share with us something of the project, give us the taste of what is in it that is highly innovative and highly Kaplanian. And I think I'd like to ask, because she appears first in the Innovation Garden, Rabbi Michelle Greenfield, to come on and tell us about her project.
Jeffrey, could you stop your screen share? Great.
I did, yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, and thank you. It's such an honor to receive this prize in honor of Dan. I'm really grateful for the ways that he's contributed to all of our communities, especially Karen, hearing you speak about getting involved at JRC because they had a Judaism that was progressive and traditional and didn't conflict with your values, because I think that is really what we're trying to do in creating a new Tefillah curriculum and creating new models for learning Hebrew and Tefillah for our students. We want them to engage with this in a way where they won't see liturgy and they won't see tradition as being in conflict with their ideas and their beliefs and their values. That's really what is at the heart of what we want to create. A few years ago, we realized that for our community, we needed a new curriculum for learning prayer. And because of our Kaplanian values, we would need to really build it from the bottom up. There were not curricula out there that we could buy that matched our values, that reflected who our kids are and who our community is in the ways that we wanted them to. And part of that was the specific liturgy. We didn't want to buy a curriculum that had Reconstructionist liturgy as an afterthought. We wanted Reconstructionist liturgy and the liturgy that we use in our community to be at the center of a curriculum that we were using and not posed as an alternative that maybe some people use. For us, starting there is key, so that our children see the liturgy of our community and the liturgy of Reconstructionism. And much of that liturgy was created by Kaplan as central and not as a far-flung possibility. We want to teach about how our traditions evolve. We want to teach about the original tefillah, but in a way that doesn't prioritize something that's not what we use. Our Hebrew teaching model is flexible, and we're really hoping that that allows this to be something that other communities use too. And I think in a lot of ways, our model of teaching Hebrew is Kaplanian. Families opt in anywhere from 2nd to 5th grade, and we are flexible in ways that don't just meet the needs of the students, but intellectually and the learning needs of our students, but also meet the needs of our students if they have hockey 5 days a week, right? We know that our students have competing needs and many things competing for their attention. And we're not saying this has to be the only thing that's important. Instead, we're saying go to your hockey game and find time for Hebrew at a different time than hockey. And I think there's something about seeing the whole kid and not saying we only want you here when you are here. That is also part of the model that we're playing with. And we really want to create a curriculum where our kids will learn and connect and see themselves. As I said, for our non-binary kids, we want to make sure that they're using a Hebrew curriculum that doesn't force them to choose a binary gender when they're praying. We know that they won't connect to Judaism and they won't want to be motivated. They won't be motivated to develop more connection and more literacy if they don't see themselves reflected in that way. We're really excited to have this prize, partly because it'll enable us to create this curriculum in a way that isn't just a Google Doc that we share with our teachers. And it's not just things that we print out in our office, but we're really excited to be able to share it beyond our classrooms and beyond our community, and to share it with you all in the Innovation Garden, and hopefully to share it with other communities beyond that as well. Thank you.
Michelle, I wonder if you could say a word. I know one thing that captured the imagination of the committee was your short vignette about how Havdalah was such an extraordinarily important prayer, given the inclusiveness you were trying to create. That captured us, I think. Could you say a word about how you would be teaching Havdalah differently in your Hebrew curriculum?
Yeah, we started with Havdalah because we imagined this curriculum because it is something that the children do as part of their Torah school each week. So it is not something that is it's not something that our kids are not seeing every week. They're seeing it on Sunday afternoon, so they already have some connections. But for us to say that there might be a language for God, a word for God that we use in our community Havdalah celebration, but to also let children choose, not just in their learning with a Hebrew teacher, but when we're doing Havdalah, what language they use for God, to give them tools to use different names for God. We included pieces from the Non-Binary Hebrew Project. And we also are really mindful of the end of Havdalah saying that there's a separation between what is holy and what is whole, what is everyday, that a lot of curricula that we looked at before we started this set it up so that what is holy was Jewish, right? The things in their Jewish world, and what was whole, what is everyday, was everything that was not in that Jewish category. And I don't believe that's true. And I don't believe that's how how we function, but also how our children function. And to set up a sense in our curriculum that's the breakdown, and Shabbat is holy and everything else is not holy, and the Jewish things are holy and everything else is not, is something that we wanted to break down, because we know that when we live in different worlds and in different communities at the same time and with different identities, it is not just our Jewish lives that hold holiness for us, and we wanted them to have space for that as well.
Thank you, Michelle. It was quite eloquent and very important, I think, for people to hear that. And now I would like to call on your colleague and my friend and colleague, Rabbi Beck Richmond, to talk about her project, via Danu.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. And Karen, I just want to say that my heart is with you and with yours. And I didn't have a chance to get to know Dan personally, but my partner, Josh Davidson's grandfather was Sam Kelman, Zichrono Livracha, and I know that they had many loves and many disagreements, and I'm just holding the legacy of both of them close at heart through this application and through this project. So in less than a month, I'm moving to Cleveland Heights. I've been saying I'm moving to Cleveland, but I'm really moving to Cleveland Heights, Ohio, with my partner and our 2 kids. My vision, part of my vision for this year of my own work and of my beginning of community engagement is to build a center for Jewish arts on the east side of Cleveland. There's a lot of art making happening on the west side, less structured on the east side of Cleveland. And I really want to bring, really hoping to bring forward art into the center of Jewish life. So Beyadenu means in our hands. And this sort of baby organization that will grow this year is founded on, as I said in my application, the Reconstructionist principles of experiential, evolving, ethical, and creative Torah learning and Jewish living. And as I was writing these words, I was just hearkening back so much to the most formative Jewish Reconstructionist education that I got at summer camp at Camp Habaya, which was when I first started going Camp JRF with Rabbi Jeff. So Beyadenu is centered on Jewish community arts. And our inaugural programs for this year are aiming to bring Jewish art back into the center of Jewish community life. So there's 2, the program specifically that we're starting with this year is going to be called, is called the Monthly Makers. And each month, I'm saying we because I'm not going to be doing this work alone. I imagine so much so that like so many of the projects that all of us are engaged in, even the person who sort of spearheads or has the idea is certainly not the only person or not the only critical person in the leadership position. So excited to meet the lay leaders who will be involved, but this will be spearheaded by myself and my colleague and actually homeowner, Rabbi Micah Shapiro. So each month in our Monthly Makers program, we'll have one art Beit Midrash program, an in-person studio that uses the Jewish studio process, an incredible pedagogy that combines spiritual grounding, text study, and art making. We'll have a visual arts studio, and we'll also have a monthly community sing. And the idea is that each month, the texts that we use in the Art Beit Midrash will also be, the liturgy and the words that are sung and workshopped in the community sing. And actually, since submitting the application, have had the idea that at the end of the year, we'll come together and open up for folks even beyond who's just participated in these little studios to be part of one big community sing, please God. Health. Hopefully everyone will be able to do so in good health and safely, but one big community sing with a gallery walk, sort of exploring these different liturgical and textual pieces, bringing forward ancient teachings from Torah and from liturgy and folklore even back into the fore of communal Jewish life in a way that is not requiring what is traditional prayer. So all of this is housed under this, for me, under this vision of building or a vision of a world where art and music are centerpieces of spiritual and community life. Something that for me helps me feel more alive as a as a Jew and as a rabbi and as an artist, and I certainly hope for in this community that I'll be building.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Richmond and Rabbi Greenfield, and I hope that has you excited about these projects as the committee became. We thought they were amazing pieces of work and good tributes to Dan's memory. I am now going to, someone put a question in the chat about what kinds of further resources will there be and links. Rabbi Beck, as you were talking, someone asked for a particular link. So we can provide those in general. Over the course of the summer, there will be links established to all the projects in the Innovation Garden. So just be a bit patient with us, and we'll make sure if you visit the Kaplan Center website, which you should, because it's always going to be full of rich stuff and an aesthetic delight as well, you will find links to go explore the 2 prize-winning projects and the 14 other projects in the garden. I see a couple muzzle tufts in the chat room as well. So Yishar Kochech to both Rabbi Beck Richmond and Rabbi Michelle Greenfield. Thank you so much for being part of our webinar. And I'm going to turn it back to Jane for a few more words about the Kaplan Center and things coming up. And then we will open this up to other comments, other people who had deep connections to Dan that want to be sharing some of those experiences or commenting on what we've already heard. So Jane, it's back to you.
Thank you, Jeff and Eric and all these wonderful presenters for such a full sense of who Dan was and what he contributed to our Reconstructionist world and beyond. And I'm so excited to see the results of the work of our Dan Cedarbaum Prize. We will be looking forward to that. There is more to come on Wednesday, August 31st at noon Eastern Time. Jeff and Debbie Shine will lead a book discussion of Rabbi Tobias Spitzer's new book, God is Here, which is an exploration of God as metaphor. Fascinating book. And then on Tuesday, September 13th, Rabbi Spitzer will join us for a webinar, and we'll send the details out to all of you. We will be sending our complete webinar schedule before the summer's end. And if any of the topics are particularly attractive to you, please consider being a sponsor of one of them. We will be approaching you if you don't approach us. So thank you again for a wonderfully moving program, and take care. Have a good rest of the day.
So like we said earlier on, we know that many of you are on this call because of your own close relationships with Dan and your own experiences of him as a person, as a Jewish leader. And we would love to hear what's on your mind as well. And perhaps since we're more than one screen, it might be the best way of doing it if under the reactions button at the bottom of your screens, if you could just choose the raise hand icon. That way I'll know that you want to speak, and we'll at least, I think, do it that way until we come down to a smaller group. So I see my friend and colleague, Mel Scalt, has his hands up. Mel. You'll have to unmute.
Yeah, I suppose it's very logical that Dan's commitment to Kaplan should begin with Judaism as a civilization. So he raised money for that publication, and I was honored to write a new introduction. And that was, I think, before the Kaplan Center was even started. I just want to say that there is a magical quality about Dan's skill In other words, he worked very, very much on his own and put together the most amazing group of conferences. And they were very, very special. I remember the conference in Georgetown, especially, and that was before the era of Zoom. And we had hundreds of people in the room and hundreds of people connected digitally. And there were some people who couldn't make it from Arizona. And, and Dan had arranged this giant screen so the presenter could, I don't know if you remember it, so the presenter could participate, and questions back and forth from the giant screen of the person in Arizona to the people in Washington, D.C. And so that was a very, very special skill in Philadelphia and Chicago and in the Naturalism Conference. And it is not something that will be easily repeated. And that's not just an empty statement, but it is actually the case. And I am very grateful, as so many of us are, to Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. I don't see anyone else with their hands up, but if perhaps somebody just wants to unmute, doesn't like the formality of the hands up.
I want to second Mel's appreciation for the conferences. They were extraordinary, and they brought people, scholars and rabbis from Israel to all over the country. They were fabulous, and on a wide range of topics. If you were not able to attend any of them, you will be able to go to our website, and we have recordings of them. So they have been preserved, and I encourage you to go peruse them.
Thank you. Catherine?
Well, I met Dan when he called me out of the blue. I don't know where he found my number. I'm not sure I know where he read my stuff, but he found out that I was interested in liturgy from a particular aesthetic critical standpoint, and he wanted to invite me to present at a conference, and that happened a couple or three times. And you know, I met rabbis whom I had only read, and I was nobody in particular, you know, but he was so interested in connecting people and connecting views. And yeah, he was intrepid. He could get anything done. And, you know, we'll all miss him dreadfully. It was an awful thing.
Arthur?
I met Dan in the cloakroom at the Anshemet Synagogue. I don't remember it was an evening meeting, and I don't remember what it was all about. And I was fairly new to Lakeview and the Anshemet community, but Dan came up to me and he said, "My name is Dan Cedarbaum, and I know who you are." I don't know how. And one of the rabbis undoubtedly had introduced, Dan and I started learning Talmud together. We went to Hadar for one of the executive seminars. And then when we came back, we started learning Talmud together. We started with Brachot chapter 4. I don't know why. What was going on in chapter 4? What's that? And we went all the way to the end, and that Talmud group, that Chavruta, grew over the years. We are now at its maximum. It was 6, and when Dan passed, we were down to 5, and now we're down to 4, sadly. But the group continues to meet every Thursday morning, as Dan and I began, and learning with him was just a marvelous experience. I've never met a community organizer like Dan. He was just the most outstanding
person who knowledgeable, deeply enmeshed in Jewish community affairs. He seemed to know everybody, and learning with him was just a great pleasure. He's sorely missed.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to say something?
I'll be happy to say something. Oh, go ahead.
No, please, Rachel.
Let's just see if I can get my camera on. Hi, everyone. I am so moved to be part of this and so grateful to all of you and to everything that you're reflecting on. Experienced Dan in so many of the same ways that you all did at conferences. I remember that very snowy Georgetown conference, and being with so many of you and so many conferences ever since. And in fact, I just went to a conference for the first time in years, and it just seemed like Dan was supposed to be there. I just expected him to step out and find me and sit down and talk for what was supposed to be just 5 minutes. And as you all know, he'd call you and just say, can we talk for 5 minutes? And it would be, 55 minutes later, quite easily, just because of all the ways in which he was so engaged with the world and what was going on in the world. The Jewish world definitely knew everyone and everything. And I will say that at every moment, actually, when I had a quandary about the Jewish world and even about Jewish thought or about Jewish institutions, he was an incredible chavruta. And I have often found myself thinking in the last year, what would Dan say? What would Dan say to do? What would Dan's read on this be? And he is just sorely missed by me, and I know by my husband Ofer as well. And the world has lost truly a great light, as well as a great organizer and a great intellect. So I'm so moved to hear and see and feel all the ways in which you're all carrying on his work and his love and his passions.
Thank you, Rachel. Roberta?
Well, I'm not only a neighbor, but a friend of the family, a study partner, someone who studied Hebrew. It was Rabbi Grossfeld, by the way, not Grossman, that we studied Hebrew with originally, in many minions in his Talmud group, one Jewish Evanson. But one of the things I'll always remember is not only did he care about Judaism, but he and the family are passionate about this country. And every 4th of July, Karen and the family would set up a table outside, and the whole neighborhood would come and we would read the Declaration of Independence out loud. Little kids, families, it was so wonderful. And that kind of passion and family and doing that together, everybody was like so excited for, and of course they served wonderful cakes and probably champagne, I don't remember, Karen. But every 4th of July, I'll always think about you and your family and how much you care about this country as well as about Judaism and about people. Thank you for those memories.
Thank you, Roberta. Does anybody else have something they want to say?
I think Karen had her hand up.
Oh, okay. Physical hand. Got it. Karen, of course.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending this, for preparing your remarks, and for preparing your wonderful submissions, and for your contributions, both monetary and intellectual. And I'm very moved by this proceeding, and my family is very grateful. Thank you.
So Jeffrey, I think maybe I'll pass it to you to close things off. I'll just say, speaking on a personal level, that statement that Rabbi Rachlis started off with, Dan was a gift. That's definitely the way I experienced Dan. And I miss him in so many ways, and many of them that have already been said. But one that hasn't been said is his very special voice, his his radio-ready voice. When he would call, if I put him on speakerphone, my wife Rosanna would come to hear the voice. You know, this gorgeous, wonderful, resonant voice. I kept a couple of voicemails from him just to be able to listen to that voice sometimes. That's such a beautiful voice. That was such a pleasure to see his name show up on my phone, which was very frequent, and to speak to him and to share with him. So Jeffrey, maybe you could close us out.
Well, I'll offer two things in conclusion. One is Dan was often also fond of metrics. So he would be glad to know that this is unusually high percentage of people who joined the call initially stayed till the end. That's because there's so much meaning and joy and connection that came through these askarot, these memories that in Dan's memory. So I think he would at least chuckle at that, being the one who often would see that webinars could be cut in half by the end of the first hour and a quarter. This one retained people's focus. I think I would like to end with a tradition I think many of you know about and have acted on in relationship to Dan, but it feels so right, which is that the notion that there is this intimate link between the letters that make up, the Hebrew letters that make up Mishnah, Mem, Shin, Nud, Hey, study, and the same letters moved around become Neshama, soul. So in traditions that are perhaps post-Kaplanian, I'm not quite sure what Kaplan would think about this, but I think Dan's growth into other forms of connection was important. It's viewed that when you study, when you tell these stories, when you do things, you're actually helping the person's neshama in aliyat neshama, in an ascent of a soul, not a supernatural ascent prompted by God, but an ascent that comes from the energies and love of the people with whom he lived. So my hope and prayer really is that not only was this, I hope it was valuable and healing for Karen and Sam and Jonathan, people who were closest and bear the strongest burden, but for all of us who obviously love Dan, it was important to us. I actually hope that it was important to Dan too, and that somehow he is moving on, and the energy that comes out of this study and these reflections are part of his journey on into worlds that we don't know and understand, but we have faith that that Dan Cedarbaum's legacy is both preserved here with us at the Kaplan Center and in your connections, but also with Dan and his journey. As if there is such a thing as Olam Haba, a world to come, I am sure Dan has already organized a half dozen study sessions up there with people that he cares about. And we will continue to do the same. I thank you for joining us. I thank you for a year that's been hard in so many ways, full of shock and sadness, but also a study in resiliency. We've had over 700 people come to 7 webinars that we've offered. We do this in large part in Dan's memory and in conviction that the Kaplan Center is so important. Thank you for joining us and helping us to sustain the Kaplan Center. Okay, so with that, I'm going to ask Eric to